Hello friends, welcome to lecture number 1 of unit number 5 Web Security. Myself Nikul Jaiswal, lecturer in Computer Engineering, Sri KJ Polytechnic, Bharuch. So unit number 5 is Web Security. So these are the topic that we are going to discuss in this unit. First is intruders. After that, in the next lectures, we will discuss the intrusion detection system. It is also called as the IDS. So basically, there are two types of IDS. First is host-based IDS. Second is network-based IDS. After that, we will discuss web security threats and security approaches. So different threats that are present in the web and what are the security approaches that we need to consider. After that, we will discuss the secure circuit layer and transport layer security to provide the security for the web traffic. And at the end, we will discuss the concept of secure electronic transaction. Now, in today's lecture, we will discuss first intrusion and intruders. So, we will discuss what is intrusion and what is intruders. Then, after that, we will discuss classes of intruders. After that, we will discuss the example of different intrusions. And after that, we will discuss the intruder behavior patterns. And we will end our lecture with the intrusion techniques. So let's start discussion of our first topic, that is intrusion and intruders. So we have already discussed what is intrusion in unit number 1. So basically an intrusion is defined as an unauthorized use, misuse or abuse of computer system by either authorized user or external perpetrator or external users. So whenever any authorized user or unauthorized user try to use the machine unauthorizedly or misuse the machine or abuse the computer system, then that event will be called as a intrusion. Now intruders may be, the intrusion can be possible from the internal network also and from the external network also. So whenever any harmful or illegal act has been done with the computer system, then that act will be considered as a intrusion as a technical term. Now intruders. So an intruder is a person who attempt to gain unauthorized access to a system or to damage that system. So any person who try to gain the unauthorized access to that computer system or try to damage the computer system or try to damage the information that has been stored in computer system will be called as a intruder. Classes of intruders. So basically there are three classes of the intruders. First is masquerader. Now an individual who is not authorized to use the computer and who penetrate a system's access control to exploit a legitimate user account. So in most of the cases, masqueraders are the external users who are not authorized to use the computer system of internal organization. So this type of intruder will try to access try to unauthorizedly access the system and try to take the control of the system to exploit the important information from the user account. Second type class of intruders are misfacers. So basically a legitimate user who access data, programs or resources for which such access is not authorized. So normally this type of intruders are the internal intruders which resides in internal network and which are basically a part of the computer networks and authorized users. So they try to access the data or programs which are not authorized to access for that particular user. So who is authorized for such access but misuse his or her privileges. So whenever any authorized user misuse the information that has been stored in the computer, that type of intruder will be called as a misfacers. And last class of the intruder is clandestine user. Now clandestine user are the individual who says supervisory control of the system. So that means let's suppose any organization has a manager and that manager uses uh, its power to misuse its power to uh, damage the computer system or information. That type of user will be called as a clandestine user. So an individual who seizes supervisory control of the system and uses this control to evade auditing and access control or to surpass the audit collection. So that type of user will be called as a client user. So these are the basic class of intruders. So masqueraders are basically external user, then misspacers are basically internal users, and client user can be external or can be an internal user. So the masquerade is likely to be outsider, missphaser generally an insider, and the client user can be either a outsider or insider. Now example of the intrusion. So any illegal activity for the computer system will be called as a intrusion. So these are the various example of the intrusions. Performing a remote root compromise of an email server. So if any user try to compromise the email server remotely, then this act will be called as an intrusion. Then defacing a web server. So let's suppose if any organization has the web server to host the website, and if any user defacing try to deface the web server, then that act will be called as an intrusion. Then guessing and cracking a password of the users will also be considered as an intrusion. Then copying a database containing credit card information. So any copying a database of any user will be called as an intrusion. Then viewing sensitive data including payroll record and medical information without authorization. So any confidential information try to view to any confidential information will be called as a intrusion. Then running a packet sniffer on a workstation to capture the username and password. So whenever any user try to capture the packets from the network by using the packet sniffer, that act will be called as an intrusion for the network. Then using a permission error on an anonymous FTP server to distribute the pirated software and music files. So many of the users try to use the FTP server to distribute the pirated software. That act will be also called as an intrusion. Then dialing into an unsecure modem and gaining internal network access will be also called as an intrusion. So many of the users try to use the modem, unsecure modem to gain the internet network. Then posing as an executive, calling the help desk, resetting the executive's email password, and learning the new password. So this is basically a social engineering attack that any user call to the help desk as an executive, and it will try to reset the executive's email password will be called as an intrusion. Then using an unattended logged in workstation without permission. That means if any legitimate user log in into a system and he stand up from that system for certain work, and some another unauthorized person sit to that machine and get access to the files will be also called as a intrusion. Now intruder behavior pattern. So every intruder will have some behavior pattern. So based on that behavior pattern, we can identify the type of intruder, and the we can also identify the type of attack that can be performed by the intruder by identifying the behavior of that intruder. So there are many people who are simply wish to explore the internet and see what is out there. At the serious end, there are some individuals who are attempting to read privileged data or confidential data, perform unauthorized modification to data, or disrupt the system. So there are many people who simply wish to explore the internet, and there are some people who try to get the confidential information or useful information from the internet. So intruders typically follow one of a number of recognizable behavior patterns. So every intruder will have some behavior pattern, and by accessing that behavior pattern, we can identify that which type of attack can be performed by the intruder and which level of knowledge can have to the intruder, and how extend the network is uh, defending from the intruders. So these patterns typically differ from those of the ordinary users. So we will first discuss the behavior of the hackers, what type of attack they will perform, or what type of behavior will they have, and what type of actions can be taken by the hacker. So this information can be identified by the behavior of the hackers. So there are the several behaviors of the hacker. The first is select the targets using IP lookup tools such as NS lookup, dig, and others. So there will be some IP lookup tools that can be used by the hackers. So normally hackers use the different types of IP lookup tool to identify the IP address range of the corporate network or internal network. So they may use the different tools like NS lookup, DIC and other tools. Then hackers will also map the network for accessible services using tools such as Nmap. Then identify the potentially vulnerable services, in this case PC anywhere. So they will also try to identify the vulnerable services that are running on the internal network, and they will map the network by using that vulnerable services. Then they will also perform the brute force attack. Then they will try to install the remote administration tool called damware to get the remote access of the machines. Then they will also wait for the administrator to log on and capture his password. So these are the various behavior patterns of the hackers, and use that password to access the remainder of network. Then criminal enterprise. So these are the various behavior patterns of the criminal enterprise. So they will act quickly and precisely to make their activity harder to detect. So they are very professional, and they will act very quickly, and they will also use some tools uh, by which they can hide their activities. They will also exploit the perimeter through vulnerable ports. So they will scan the ports, they will identify the open ports, and they will try to exploit that open ports. Then they will also use the Trojan horse to leave the backdoors for re-entry. Then they will also use the sniffers to capture the password. Then criminal enterprise also do not stick around until noticed. Then make few or no mistakes. So basically criminal enterprise make very few mistakes, or it may be possible there will be no mistake by the criminal enterprises. Next is the internal threats. So these are the behavior pattern of the internal threats or insiders of the organization. So first of all, they will create the network account for themselves and their friends to access the internet. Then they will also access the account and application they would not normally use for their daily jobs. They will also email former and prospective employers, then conduct furtive instant messaging chats. Then they will also visit websites that cater to discredited employees. That means the website that will make the employee unhappy. Then perform large download and file copying and access the network during off hours. So these are the internal threats by the insider employees. Now intrusion techniques. So there are various intrusion techniques to identify the various information or confidential information that has been stored in the machines. So the objective of the intruder is to gain the access to a system or to increase the range of privileges accessible on a system. So most initial attack use system or software vulnerabilities that allows a user to execute code that opens a backdoor into a system. Alternatively, the intruder attempt to acquire information that should have been protected. So basically the intruder will try to identify the information or to get the access of the information that should have been protected from the various threats. In some cases, this information is the form of user password. So basically the insider or the intruders will try to identify the password of the user so that they can get access the various information that has been stored in machines. Typically, a system must maintain a file that associate a password with each authorized user. So in the corporate network, there will be a number of users, and for the number of users, there will be a number of user ID and password. So we need to store, system will store that user and username and password in files. So if such file is stored with no protection, then it is an easy matter to gain access to it and learn password. So that file can be used to identify the user ID and password for certain users for the misuse. The password file can be protected in one or two way. So one way function, so this is the most basic way to store the password or to protect the password. So in the one way function, the hash value of the password will be identified, and that hash value will be stored with the in the file. So no plain text password will be stored in the file. So this is the first method that will be used to store the password. So the system stores only the value of the function based on user password When the user presents a password, the system transforms that password and compares it with the stored value. In practice, the system usually performs a one-way transformation. It is also called as a hashing, in which the password is used to generate a key for the one-way function, in which a fixed length output is produced. So the fixed length output will be called as a hash value. So this is the first way to store the password. Second is the access control. So access to the password file is limited to one or a very few accounts. So access control can be also implemented to give the access to the password file to the particular users. If one or both of these countermeasures are in place, some efforts is needed to potentially intruder to learn password. So if we use one of the method, then intruder has to use some techniques to identify the password of the user. So following are the technique that can be used to learn the password from the user. So try default password. First of all, what the intruder will do, the intruder will use the default passwords. So many administration do not bother to change the default password, and that default password can be easily guessed by the intruders. Then exhaustively try all short passwords. So intruder will try all the short password that can be used by the user. Then try words in the system's online dictionary. So dictionary attack can be performed to learn the various passwords. Then collect information about users, and that information will be used as a password. Then try user phone number, social security number, and room number as a password to identify the valid password of the particular user. Then try all legitimate license plate number for this state. Then use a Trojan host to bypass the restriction on access. Then last is tap the line between a remote user and the host system. That means sniffing a packet to identify the username and password. So this was all about the intrusion and intruders that can be work on the web security. I hope you did understand all the topics that has been discussed in this video lecture. Thank you so much.